That's me face.
Hello, this is Untethered Layers. My name is Dawood Rachel,
And this is Rachel Tyler.
and we have a very special guest in the studio this week. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm Rachel's twin sister.
Twin sister. You can probably tell based on the fact that their voices sound exactly alike that they are identical twins. You might know Diane from the hit John Cougar Mellencamp song, Jack and
Stop.
Diane, but she's been famous for having her name mentioned twice, I think, in this in Untethered Layers so far. So we wanted to have her on to discuss one of, would you say, your personal favorite albums?
Yes. I mean, Alopecia, like everybody else apparently, is my favorite album, but Mumps is my second favorite Y album for sure. So I really wanted to put in my 2 cents.
Here you go, and we're glad to have you. Thank you very much. So I will start up, I guess, with some of the context of the album. And I'm gonna pull a quick cop out real quick. I landed back in Texas about 4 hours ago, something like that, and I had basically no time to be doing any research for this album other than the 6 years that I've been listening to it. But yeah, I might take a more of a back seat on this episode and let the sisters discuss what they need to discuss. But I will still be here to give you all of your very specific Y facts, like the fact that this came out in October 9th, 2012. Rachel had to correct me earlier because I thought it came out in September. But it's one of the longer albums that we've talked about so far. We said I think Alopecia was about 40 minutes, right?
45.
45, yeah. This one is right up on 38 minutes and 48 seconds.
Wow.
So it's definitely longer than it's longer than I think Eskimo Snow was, and
Oh, yeah, definitely.
and Moh Lhean is the shortest of all of them we realized today, which I hadn't noticed before. But it came out in 2012 to very polarizing reviews. I mentioned a little bit last week about how Eskimo Snow is kind of not forgotten, but kind of the companion piece to Alopecia rather than its own album. But it still garnered generally favorable reviews. So did Mumps, but there were some very intensely not favorable reviews. I won't go into what they, who it was. It was Pitchfork, but yeah, this one, for whatever reason, this album was pretty polarizing whenever it came out, just because I think the sound was so different. They went so far one way that it was bound to make people uncomfortable or make people not like it.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a specific direction that yeah, it was such a specific direction that if it wasn't a style that you were really into, then of course it was going to be annoying or not what you were expecting. So yeah, I think that some polarizing reviews is to be expected a little bit with an album like this.
Yeah, and I think they did they decided that we're going to go a little bit weirder on this album. To me, it just sounds like they went in. They're like, we're going to have some fun with this recording session. We're going to try to make it more fun this time. And they, at least that's how it comes across to me, because this album is a lot more fun than the other albums to me. The lines are really clever. The sounds, they have weird noise, sample. We talked about the glass breaking in, what is it?
Jonathan's Hope.
Is that Jonathan's
the
Hope?
first song?
But we talked about also that one sound.
Oh,
it sounds
right.
bricks clattering on the ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to.
When I got better from the mumps, yes, my swollen nut and neck shrunk, but
that is, as far as I know, mostly generated by Josiah and his love for slamming weird things on a drum set.
Well, that's... Did you want to talk about...
Oh, that Rachel pointed out to me at our last show that for Valve's Part 2 that he uses the chain.
Yeah.
On the drums.
I never noticed that. And Rachel's like, oh, I saw when he pulled out that chain they were going to do Valve's Part 2.
Yeah, that's something I had forgotten to mention in our Alopecia episode. How another thing that makes that first track so great is it makes it so heavy is the physical chains on the record. But we're not talking about Alopecia.
I mean, we're going to continue talking about Alopecia
in every episode.
But it's they just took super some weird noises or some weird shit, and we're we'll hit the drum set with it, or we'll see what kind of fun we can have with this track. But yeah, so to me at least, it is one of the most fun albums. For a while I was kind of I can kind of see why people don't like this album. I get it, but now I just don't understand where they're coming from. It doesn't make any sense. This album is still one of my favorites, just throughout the discography, but just of all time. But yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about your particular connection to this album? Diane?
Sure.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that it's your second favorite Y album.
I mean, like you mentioned last week that we had the CD in our car of Alopecia and then most of the tracks from this album that we just had on rotation for basically a year and a half.
so
Anyway, so I guess that there's like a lot of tracks on this one that I know just as good as Alopecia, and they're like just as near and dear to my heart as
yeah, well, there wasn't as much distinction between these two albums because we had them.
found them around the same time.
Yeah, we found them at
Right,
the,
yeah.
pretty much the exact same time, and we listened to them back to back.
Yeah.
So there wasn't.
You all had a mixed CD that had both songs from both
Yes.
albums on there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Was
yeah.
it just those two albums?
Yeah.
On that one, yes,
Oh.
but then we also had a couple other albums of Y's
Okay.
in the car.
Cool. Yeah, I never did the mixed CD thing. I just did the Windows Media Player. But your school, Diane, is what I was talking about. Yeah.
Oh.
Do you want to talk about that?
Just that they recorded a lot of the orchestral parts with Denton, Texas, at my college,
Yes.
University of North Texas. So that's kind of cool.
I remember. I think we were just like we were all on a Skype call one day, and I was just browsing like the description catalog of Mumps or something, and I saw that they enlisted the help of a professor at University of North Texas, and I was like, I think you guys were in the middle of a conversation. I was like, hold on,
Very
like listen to
important
this, yeah. No, that blew my mind whenever I figured it. Like I don't understand why out of everywhere he came down to Denton.
I mean, I guess UNT is like a really prestigious music.
Yeah. And maybe he knew one
Department,
of the professors.
music department, yeah.
I don't know. It's just that's a fun fact that we have tied to the Lone Star State.
Well, and wasn't the album cover photographed at UNT as well?
See, you brought this up the other week. I had no idea there was like a really intense process into the making of this album cover. Do you guys?
I
wanna
remember
talk
that
about
video.
Yeah, I remember seeing the video for it.
I haven't seen it in a while, so
Okay,
wouldn't have a
well
lot to
maybe
say,
I don't want to say where that was taken, but but yeah, for anybody that doesn't know, the album cover is
practical.
a three-dimensional practical set that was created, and that's a real person being photographed on the cover.
Is that you, Diane, on the cover?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, so like I said, I haven't come prepared with tracks that I'm going to talk about. I was just gonna kind of wing it, like we do with the other ones. That I'm happy to bounce back.
I want to really quickly talk more about the album as a whole.
Yeah.
Before we go too deep into the tracks. I mean, what you said about the album being fun is a good way of describing it, even if what he's talking about isn't actually fun subject matter, just like
it's
everything.
like kind of campy.
Campy,
which
yeah.
can have that sort of negative, I guess, quality to it.
Right,
but-
yeah. Well, it's really jokey and tongue-in-cheek, and I can see how a lot of people, because Alopecia was so raw and such an open wound, I feel like this album may have come across as a little too maybe sarcastic, or some people maybe it was off-putting how
Not serious.
how not serious he was taking the subject matter.
Despite it being his own life.
How he was coping with whatever was going on in his life at the time.
Right, yeah. I think this is a very specific time in his life in general, and also in the recording process where, in Alopecia and Eskimo Snow, that era, he's very down on himself, very sad and depressed, obviously. But whenever Mumps comes around, at least with the sound and the way that he structures a lot of the songs, it seems like he's kind of on the upswing, but still being like kind of cynical about it, but not like super depressed about it, if that makes sense. Like he's not to the point where he's at in Moh Lhean where he's super accepting of it and he's like kind of going to the flow. He's still kind of like, yeah, shit sucks, but like I'm gonna try to be funny about it at least. Which is I like the mood and the tone of this entire album just makes me smile whenever I think about it. And whenever we see him play these tracks live, he seems to have the most fun playing some of these tracks because they kind of have the most, I guess they're the most verbose out of all of the other tracks that he can play. With Alopecia, generally it's like a pretty dark tone on the stage. He's there like playing his bass or playing his guitar, and everybody's singing along to all the Alopecia songs, obviously. But whenever he plays Mumps tracks live, he's a lot more animated and a lot of the
I would
hand
say
gestures
so.
and stuff like that. And he kind of, Diane and I were talking earlier about how he has very slight shifts in the way that he sings live versus in studio, and I generally see that the most in Mumps tracks.
Yeah.
Would you guys say the same?
I think that like Mumps, he kind of pushed. It's like if you look at where the songs sound like in Elephant Eyelash, and then going into Alopecia, it's like it becomes more of like that wordplay and like rapping kind of. And then I feel like with Mumps, he like wanted to push that as far as he could.
Right, yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think, where the fun, and then but also I think maybe, I don't know if he actually felt this way, but sometimes I kind of feel maybe he like trapped himself in that like, this is what I do, because he kind of references that a lot in the songs of like being a poet or like having to do all this wordplay.
Right,
but
yeah.
I guess now that it's like he can't have fun with it, and I have fun with it. That's one of the reasons I love this album so much, is because it's like so fun to get all the words right, basically, and that's kind of why I listen to it so much, because it's like I have to know all these words.
Yeah, and like all those tracks have such interesting flow to them that it's like always super satisfying, both listening to them and singing along them, the same way that I felt about Fall of Mr. Fifth's.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, what Diane just said about wanting to get all the words. It's almost like when I first was getting into this album, it really was more about me wanting to get all the words.
Right, yeah.
Because the words didn't even really mean anything to me. They were so confusing and weird.
They're kind of abstract.
Very abstract. And so it was kind of like, oh, I'm not going to understand what this is talking about anyway, but I want to be able to sing along.
Right, yeah, and have fun with it.
Something that I said last week, or that we've kind of been saying in the past couple episodes, is calling him, the way that he sings, kind of like mumble rapping. And I actually wanted to take that back, to retract that, because I think that mumble rapping is a very specific type of rapping that he raps kind of monotone, but
mumble rap is its own very distinct genre.
Exactly, and I think that Yoni enunciates so clearly when he's rapping. It's really fun because he's almost exaggerating the enunciation as opposed to
the opposite,
subduing it, which is what mumble rapping is.
Yeah, and in a lot of mumble rapping, there's kind of just like off the wall, whether like just random strings of thought or ad libs, which obviously he doesn't do. Those are two pretty distinct features of mumble rap. I would say that I don't want to say it would be a disservice to attribute mumble rap to him, but that's not what he does. He does it a lot more cleanly. He does it like, obviously he puts a lot of thought into the words that he says.
But yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
I guess going what y'all were just talking about, it being kind of like the opposite of mumble rap, and I feel like a lot of things that I've read about why people attribute it to being stream of consciousness.
Right, yeah.
Which I think you could say it can be, in that it is very like what we said about or what y'all said about alopecia being like a diary entry or whatever, but it's also like so specific, like the words that he's saying. It feels very like what's the word, like a
curated.
Yes, curated. Of like, each little word has its own little place, I guess. It's like
Yeah, like
I
said,
I mean?
It's obvious that he put a lot of time into how the songs played out and their structure.
It's not an accident how they fall together.
Right, yeah. And I like what you said earlier about it being like him taking the sort of character that he had built around himself and pushing it to the max on this record. I think that's, like we said earlier, part of the reason maybe it wasn't
why it might have not
fallen,
done so well
on
is
some,
because people were like, this isn't why I like why.
Yeah, this is like too much one way rather than just like playing it safe. Which I think Alopecia, was a huge departure, but I think they did that really, really well.
Yeah.
And
objectively, it was a better balance.
Right, yeah. And whenever you do something like that, whenever you make such a huge change from either Elephant Eyelash to Alopecia or Eskimo Snow to Mumps, like it's a hit or a miss on whether or not it's going to succeed. And Alopecia was the hit and Mumps is the miss, I would say. At least, speaking from
like critically or
from the critical standpoint. Like I said, this is still, I mean, Alopecia is higher up on my list than Mumps is, but Mumps still kills it for me every single time.
Yeah.
But do you guys want to start talking about tracks? I'm desperate to get into these tracks.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's go.
Because I think there's so much to talk about in all of them. Because like I said, these tracks are really round. They're very like the same way that we talked about Eskimo Snow being more open and like more, or Elephant Eyelash being more robust than Oakland. This I feel the same way about this album in that like the production is like cleaner than Alopecia, I would say.
Really?
Or it's like more, I guess I would say meticulous maybe, than Alopecia. Not to say that it was like sloppy or anything like that, but this is, I guess I would say, produced to like a...
There's a lot of attention to detail.
Exactly, yeah. It's almost like a painting, like a piece of art or something, that they obviously wanted it to like shine, at least in the way that it sounds, rather than Eskimo Snow almost sounds like it was like recorded as a live session. I would say, yeah. And then this is very heavily produced, which I think goes into making it maybe more accessible in a almost pop way. Obviously, it's not pop music, but that might be why I like some of the songs so much, is because they're so polished and so clean and so like fun to sing along to. We'll start with Rachel.
Oh dear.
What track did you want to do?
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about Strawberries a little bit. I think that's a favorite amongst fans.
For sure.
I know that we mentioned some fans, weren't as into this album, but I feel like there's a lot of songs on this album that are
like
plenty
their
of
big
bangers,
hits.
that people love. So Strawberries is definitely one of those.
Definitely. This is one of the ones that I feel like if a crowd gets the most amped whenever Strawberries is up. Yeah. The same way with Good Friday, I would say.
Or like
the
one of
energy
the
is similar.
first ones that people hear. It's like the Hollows, and then I think Strawberries is like one of the first ones
Really?
that I heard.
Strawberries was one of the first ones I heard.
One of the first ones that really got me into it. I remember really listening to it a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like it's that song is a pretty safe bet on getting people into why it's not
just
super
like
out there. It's
fun.
just fun. Exactly. Yeah. And we keep going back to the two words fun and clever. The same way to Alopecia, we talked about it just being like dark
and personal.
Dark and personal. We just need to start attributing like two words to each of these albums, and that'll be the whole podcast. We're gonna have a 15-second long podcast. But yeah, Strawberries is like you said, I think one of the most fun tracks. It's like the brightest, it's the happiest, sounding at least to me on this record. And it seems almost like not a departure, but it seems misplaced or out of place, at least in regards to the rest of the songs, because a lot of the rest of the songs are like we were talking about before we started recording. He talks a lot about being sick. He talks a lot about like super explicit, like, shitting black blood at 6 or stuff like that. But this one is just like a little bit more. It's not as focused on that. It's more focused on just like a brighter energy. Or that might just be the sound of it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it opens up again. Great transition from the first song into Strawberries, and it has that little maraca in the background or whatever. I don't even know, with some instrument in the background, and it's such a sweet opening.
Strawberries on your birthday, Shirley. The shit I said to hotel managers haunts me.
Yeah, it's just such a short, fun song that I think is impossible to not be attracted to in some form or fashion. And I really love the line. I really love the lines when he talks about the shit I said to high school counselors haunts me at the very end when he says that.
The shit I said to high school counselors haunts me, and I am not okay, boys.
I mean, who can't relate to that line?
Right.
You know?
And that goes back to one of the most distinct lines throughout all of their albums to me, from Into the Shadows of My Own Embrace, where he says, I know saying all this in public should make me feel funny. Like this sort of like confession, this how uncomfortable it is to talk to people about yourself. He talks a lot about that in a lot of his albums. And I think this is sort of, at least in Mumps versus Eskimo Snow, whenever he talks about stuff like that, this line talks about the same stuff, but in a very different way, where he says like he's more, I guess, regretful in this line than he was in Into the Shadows of My Embrace, where he says he seems more like free about it.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to what you said earlier about, I was saying that this song sounds brighter, and it's definitely only is musically.
Right, because the chorus is I'm not okay.
Yeah, just like over and over. But yeah, no, definitely one of the most fun tracks on the record, I would say.
Well, it's the kind of song that sounds so happy that you, even though he's literally saying I'm not okay, I'm not okay, like My Chemical Romance or something, but it goes over your head, or at least over my head.
Like Hey Ya by Outkast. That's the one I was thinking.
That is exactly what I was thinking about. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but yes, exactly like Hey Ya. because it's so infectious and you don't realize it, and even when you hear it, you kind of don't want to think about
Exactly,
like, oh, this might not be that great.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I always love Strawberries, and I always love when they play it live.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a fun song.
Yeah, for sure. We we smiled and laughed a little bit because Rachel and I saw Y in Austin together, and they played Strawberries, and then Diane and I saw Y in Dallas, and they did not play
They
Strawberries.
did not play Strawberries.
So, Yoni, I know that you're listening. Diane is very upset
Oh
with
no!
you.
Don't say that.
But yeah, do you want to go with one of your tracks now? Diane?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about one of my favorite tracks on this record is Waterlines, which they did play at the last concert. I was very excited. I didn't expect them to play it. It's one where I definitely first liked it because the wordplay is so fun, you know, to like sit and like, oh, I'm going to get every single one of these words. But then I guess one of the, obviously there's like the themes of like illness or like loneliness, you know, that he's kind of talking about a lot on this record. But I think one thing that I was kind of like reevaluating the lyrics the other day, and something that he kind of touches on is like fame.
Yeah.
And how, and Rachel and I are really interested in that right now, basically about how fame can kind of change a person. And so it was kind of interesting looking back at these lyrics when he talks about, well, really like at the end where he says, you know, I'd rather be unknown and have like a stable life and have my kid running to greet me than be on tour all the time.
Right,
and it's like so like taking an emotional toll on this, on me.
I'd prefer to be some unknown with a sports car than pen the dumb pun poems as a poor star. You wanna just come home through the courtyard, your son run to greet you with the perfect report card.
So that's really, it's always sad because you always look up to these people, you know, or it's like, oh, I love that they make music for me, or, you know, just me. But then it's like, oh man, like it's so hard, you know,
like
it's like, it's a job and it's like
love
rough.
them so much for doing this thing that is really a huge emotional toll on
Yeah.
them. Yeah, as a person.
And physical, you know, it's like touring. I can't imagine how exhausting it is.
Touring with like mumps or touring like after,
I mean,
like, with Crohn's, like that's gotta be
I mean,
super
when
hard.
we don't have to put this in, but when we saw Tennis a few months ago, she said I have the flu right now. She was on stage talking about it.
Literally at when I saw Snail Mail and then Bellows back to back last week, and both of them got sick. Like Snail Mail, Lindsay had to cut her set short because she was sick, and Oliver and Bellows was like, "Hey, like I did it. Like apparently I just got like laryngitis out of nowhere."
Oh my gosh.
So he finished the set, but he was like, "If I can't hit the high notes, like that's why." And like. Whenever at the Snail Mail concert, whenever she was like, "Hey, I might have to cut the songs short," some people were like, "No, keep singing." I'm like, "This is a literal 18-year-old girl that is like putting this huge, she's ill, and she's like putting this huge like touring is taxing." Like she told us, she talked about it on stage. She was like, "Whenever you get sick, like you can't do anything about it. You're singing every single night. You don't have time to recover."
Well, when you become, you know, an artist at a certain level, people kind of dehumanize you in a way and just see you as this product that they want to hear, because they're like,
you become a product and a service of like, you're here to
serve me, the audience, and people really forget that, you know, it's a person up there. And but kind of looking at these words, I mean, he kind of talks about that. Well, he kind of talks about fame a little bit inside the
I was about to say, and I never really noted, like, I obviously, you know, I would sing along to the lyrics, but I didn't really realize that it's kind of a theme that, like a sub theme, maybe like a B-side theme that kind of permeates throughout the whole record, isn't talking about like his relative fame. Even on the Sandollar EP on Miss Ohio's Nameless, you know, he talks about so the kids on the internet say that you're a big noise. You made the message board top 10.
So the kids on the internet say that you're a big noise. You made the message board top 10, $1,000 to sing your verse and chorus until their alcohol's all gone.
He talks about like his relative fame, how he thought it would be versus what other people think it is versus how it actually is.
Yeah.
Because on that track, whenever he says, you know, you made the message board top 10, but then he goes on to say, like, you know, they pay you $1,000 to sing your verse and chorus until their alcohol's all gone. And he says, like, he says something about they don't give a shit about your melancholosity or something like that. It's
wow.
just like, yeah, there are these people
It's
who are
true.
there, yeah, and it's like,
And they've been giving me $1,000 to see my autobiography, but they're not giving a flying fuck about my melancolosity.
everybody's like, oh, it's so cool that you get to tour, especially, you know, back then when it was I think that came out in 2003, where he was still, you know, trying to break into the scene, or he had relative underground fame, but everybody's like, oh, you know, you're getting to tour these shows, and he's like, these people don't care, like they're giving me money to, you know, basically read out my diary to them, and all they're doing is drinking, you know. It's yeah, so that, I guess that theme of fame kind of goes back a little bit more, but is definitely a lot heavier on Mumps. I wanted to talk about Paper Hearts, because I talked about,
That's a good one.
yeah, Fall of Mr. Fist being the most fun one to sing on Alopecia. This is, I think, the counterpart to that on Mumps. Like, it's, if I can get every single one of these words right, it's a good day, you know. And it's just so, it's like it just like grabbed you and then sat you down, and he's just like saying all this straight to your face, you know. It's very straightforward. Even we were watching a live session of it earlier, and it was just like completely a cappella. Like, it was just him talking to a mic while he's just like standing there. So definitely one of the most like monotonous, like straightforward songs on the album, but it's just a lot. He's just speaking a lot to you. You know, there's no hook, there's no catchy verse, there's no chorus or anything like that. It's just like, I think a little bit more akin to stuff on Alopecia that was more focused on just stream of consciousness and thoughts that he had, rather than trying to beautify it in the way that Elephant Eyelash or sometimes Eskimo Snow or Moh Lhean does.
Yeah, and in Paper Hearts, he just keeps going. Like you said, there's no
break,
point or break or hook. Kind of like, I don't know if you're going to talk about Bitter Thoughts
I will
later,
yeah, but yeah.
but Bitter Thoughts is similar in the verse format, but it has that break as the chorus or pre-chorus or whatever you want to call it. Whereas Paper Hearts, it's just, he just keeps going.
Right,
it keeps getting darker, and you know, I can't sing along with it because I need to breathe.
Right, yeah.
But he doesn't
He's
stop to
gaining
breathe.
momentum the entire time.
Momentum, yeah.
And I think between that, Bitter Thoughts, and Follow Mr. Fist, like I said, those are my favorite ones to sing along to, because it is like a test of endurance, basically, on getting through singing this track. But yeah, like I said, if I can get all these words right, it's incredible.
One thing that I would want to say about this track is that, like, the very, very end, obviously the line preemptive nostalgia of the possible but doubtful is, I think, another, y'all were talking about those quintessential lines or whatever from Alopecia a couple weeks ago. I think that's one of the lines that also can kind of people really relate to. But right after that, when he says, and always something reminds me of you.
And always something reminds me of you.
That part, it makes me think of the very end of the Hollows, where they have that little part at the end, you know, that, like,
The
if you're
speaking
not,
part.
that speaking part at the end, if you're not really listening, you kind of miss it. And that little line kind of reminds me of that.
Just that, like a
afterthought.
little epilogue. Yeah. But yeah, just we talked a lot about his wordplay, it obviously being very clever in this, but you said it was like a little bit more like he took an older maybe sort of character or an older sort of attitude that he had and sort of pushed it. I think it shines really brightly on this track, because it is very, he's still talking a lot about his own personal situations, but he's doing it in a very roundabout and clever way. It's very wordy, this whole track, and a lot of the tracks on this record are very, very wordy. He's not as clear and cut to the point as he was maybe on Alopecia. He's sort of going a roundabout way to express sort of the same sentiments.
Yeah, and even in some of these tracks, I feel like he's not even necessarily speaking for himself. Like, he seems to be donning some kind of character.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that character, or like this album the most, you could define one sort of like caricature of Yoni. Like, it's
or even in I don't know, because songs like Danny or Kevin's Cancer, it's like I don't really know what he's talking about. I don't know if he's saying I, Yoni, know someone who is going through this, or is this, I remember in like an English class or something, there would be a lot of confusion if we're reading a poem. It doesn't mean that it's the author speaking, it means it's the main character speaking of the poem, and you shouldn't get those two confused. I think Yoni does speak for himself quite a lot in his work, but I think it's also important to not think that every single thing that he's saying is his experience.
And he is really good about, sort of crafting narratives that don't necessarily directly relate to his life or aren't exactly personal experiences he's had himself. He's good about like building worlds from the ground up, sort of based on his own emotions
as a way to get through something.
Exactly,
or
as a way to sort of get that out. But I know one of you wanted to talk about.
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about White English, but I couldn't really think of anything to say other than I just love that song.
Let's pull it up. Let's see if we can get some good, sweet lyrics out of this.
I mean, that's another one where it just like it starts and I just get like excited.
Yeah. And it starts with such a crash. Yeah. And I think this track shows the most. I think when I was saying whenever he plays these songs live, he's the most animated.
Yeah.
I definitely I can remember how much he moved along to the song whenever he's singing, and it gets everybody else moving too. I get hyped whenever I hear this live because I just whenever I sing along to songs in general, I'm an animated person. I do a lot of hand movements or sort of like gestures or anything like that. But it's the highest energy in the crowd is with fun songs like this because the instrumentation is really satisfying, and then also he's up there sort of.
Well, he's not behind the drums when he does this one. He's right there in front of the audience, so it's almost more personal.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, he generally does that with Mumps songs a lot. He'll sort of.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have the. He's not on his, like you said, drum pad, or he doesn't have his guitar like he does on alopecia tracks. He's just sort of there, interacting directly with the audience. Actually, I think I talked to you, Diane, recently about. We're talking a lot about other bands than we have in past episodes, but of Montreal. Recently on their last tour, Kevin talked about how he wasn't going to play any instruments. He'll record the instruments, but whenever they play it live, he's not going to play any instruments because he wants to put himself in the place of an audience member. He wants to be as close to them, as connected to them as he possibly can. So he's doing exactly what they're doing. He's standing with no instruments or anything, and he's just singing and dancing along to his own songs. I thought that was fucking beautiful. I love that idea so much that he's sort of just breaking down the barrier between I'm up here holding a guitar, you guys are watching me, and he's sort of come on and join me. I think at least in Y live shows that shines the brightest on Mumps tracks.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because obviously an audience member's reasons for dancing or reacting to a song is completely different to the reason that a musician is reacting to the same song that they created. And both the audience member and the creator have probably heard the song hundreds of times, but in completely different contexts. So that's kind of an interesting experience. It's kind of
bridging the gap between people taking these songs, relating them specifically to their own lives, and sort of just bringing them together in this live context. I love live Y shows. Obviously we're biased because they're one of our favorite bands, but Yoni really knows how to put on he's got good banter with the crowd. He really knows how to make people feel that he's there for them just as much as they're there for him.
Yeah, especially recently.
Yeah, for sure. I would say. You guys caught the Golden Tickets tour, right?
Yeah. I guess I don't know if it was technically. I haven't looked it up. If it was technically Golden Tickets, it was the tour after the Mumps tour.
Okay, yeah.
So if that's what it was, then that's
what was it? 2013?
Yeah, it was September 2013, September 28th.
Oh,
I remember.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember it being 2013 because I remember it was also the year you guys saw Vampire Weekend, and I had to miss both of those shows.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
But yeah, so sort of compare. I think we've talked about this before, but compare his energy to that show versus these shows.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Thinking about how he acted back in 2013, and it felt heavier. He was doing a lot, almost. Maybe exclusively just singing into a mic in front of the stage, because it was a lot of Mumps songs, of course, since that album had just recently come out. But I remember comparing that to even when we saw him at Yoni and Getty, 3 years later or whatever. He seemed so much peppier and happier. And then for these last two Y shows, it's he just seems like in a better place. Like he's having more fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully touring, and yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I had watched the live videos y'all took of that tour back in 2013, and yeah, because the first time I ever saw Yoni was whenever he played as Yoni and Getty. He came through Austin and Dallas, and I caught those shows. And I remember being surprised at how much fun he seemed to be having, because I had seen in the videos that you guys had taken, not that he didn't seem to be enjoying himself, but he was definitely like, I feel like
we'd
more
heard that
distracted.
he was sick.
Yeah.
For that part of the tour.
Yeah.
So maybe.
And
that's
even
why he
like
was...
I would say just the sort of mood that followed around that time, around 2012 2013 era at Yoni, obviously with a lot of the dark subject matter on Mumps, like it makes sense that he wasn't as super happy or super peppy versus the Moh Lhean tour that we got. Both of them, not only is the actual like stage so much brighter because they have all those lights, and like Moh Lhean is like really open and very pretty, but yeah, just the stage presence there is just so much warmer, so much more friendly, and I love it so much.
Yeah.
I don't want to go on too much about how much I love seeing Y in concert, but we are going to again the same way Noah and Gavin are for this Alopecia
in
10-year anniversary.
November, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I will be at both of those Texas shows again, and I know I'll see y'all there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Bitter Thoughts, like Rachel said, for sort of the same reason I wanted to talk about Paper Hearts, just because it's so much fun to listen to. But I remember we pointed out, I think this is the only track pre-Moh Lhean that has any female vocals in it.
Any prominent, I'd say.
Yeah. Liz, her vocals shine really brightly in this. I remember this is one of the music videos I've seen like 100,000 times.
I was gonna say I don't watch a lot of their music videos, but this is one I always think of a plastic covered couch when I listen to this song now.
Yeah, so this is one of the first music videos I saw whenever I started trying to get like deeply into Y. So I sort of attribute this this video and this era of Y really strongly in my mind for that reason, because it was sort of like my I strapped my miner's helmet on and just went directly into this discography. Like that's when I got the deepest into it. I would say after I met y'all is whenever it happened. I think just because I finally had other people other than my sister.
Yeah, because you
brother
obviously had been listening to Y for
right,
casually for years.
Yeah,
but
and I love the shit out of Alopecia, Elephant Eyelash, and Jaime's Basement. Those I listen to those all the time, but I never, at least at that point, I was never super interested in learning more about the artists or learning more about how they create. I was just wanting to ingest the music as much as I could. But yeah, so I started getting the deepest into Y around this time. So this song is really special to me because it was like sort of one of the catalysts for that. I would sit and watch this music video a bunch. And Liz is in it, and she's got her super, like, I love her sort of like creepy, almost like doll vocals that she has in the back of this.
His text says not with carcass.
From the backs of 10 flyers and pen, the guilt-racked liar pretends to confess.
Yeah, and this is another one of those just like really, it's like a ridiculous amount of bars on this verse, and he's just like talking and talking and talking.
Yeah.
But like it's like he never ever loses momentum or loses steam or loses like the cleverness in how much there is. Like it's just so much to take in, but it's all good. Yeah, we talked a lot about on this record. He's pretty self-deprecating, but in an almost fun way. Definitely differently than in Alopecia. Like on this track, he says he talks about whenever he was a little kid. He'd throw fits and punch doors, and he's still in this track referring to himself as a pallid sallow corpse from a rising hell to swallow. Like he's obviously doesn't see himself in a super bright light.
Down pinned on the floor, trading places with my shadow. A pallid sallow corpse for a rising hell to swallow. Fully unarmed or armed under the robes with a staff only. You're unarmed, fully under the robes through the ribs and inner body. But for a bulging lung of poison, poised to voice its cuts. And what's worse, of course, the sick and bily gut.
But like I said, he's sort of taking it in stride, I'd say, rather than he did in Alopecia, where he's sort of just like feeling hopeless, which I think plays into why this album is so much fun. Not that the subject matter is fun, but because he's having fun with it.
This may be a little repetitive of what we've said at the beginning of the episode. As a whole, this album is a little more difficult to sum up in terms of a theme or a through line. It does I think upon re-listens feel slightly muddled in terms of a through line, like I just said, which is where some people may have been harder for people to digest in one sitting or something like that. But I think that every track is distinct still. It's still so much fun to listen to. I still hear something new most of the times that I listen to it. It's rewarding.
Right. And like I said, because it's like he never stops with, you know, belting out these clever lines or, you know, all of these like really impressive choruses and stuff like that. Like he doesn't give you really a second to stop and catch. I mean, obviously on some of the tracks there are choruses and there's like some refreshers, but it's a lot to take in, I think.
There's definitely less melody.
Yeah, for sure. And it's I mean, just even talking about Bitter Thoughts and Paper Hearts, just like I said, just straight through, like he sat you down and he's like, you know, talking.
And honestly, the same with, I would say, White English and Waterlines for the most part, you know. It's White English, the quote unquote chorus is like lost in translation, and then another verse starts, you know. So
under sail only for a hole to hell to fill with handfuls and handfuls of lucerne dust, or plug up level really with anything other than us, and then to toss a dusty rug over.
And I think those tracks definitely fall in line, I think, with, like you said, with Bitter Thoughts and stuff like that, where it's like very
verse heavy.
Yeah, verse heavy. It's just a lot. But the actual like way that they sound and the instruments and stuff like that is a lot more open, which is at least with Bitter Thoughts and Paper Hearts especially, where like I said, that's like the most deadpan. Like he's just like talking straight into
That's a great way to say it.
Earlier, but I kept saying monotone. But yeah, just like the deadpan delivery of Paper Hearts is like sort of stands out the most to me on the record, because a lot of these sort of confessions and like monotonous, almost like all of this monotonous self-deprecation is shrouded in like fun, super fun beats, or like
it's very hypnotic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Diane, was there anything you wanted to comment on really quickly about any of the other albums, or while we have you here?
Yeah, like any
I guess
horrible mistakes we made on our previous episodes.
I think the final, I don't know if this is a good end note, but one other thing that I wrote down that at least I wanted to kind of talk about was, I guess, the lack of religious references in this one as opposed to Alopecia.
Yeah, I mean, there are some, but...
Yeah, there's going to be some with his background, but, like, the only one, I guess, that I, like, really caught that I guess I could remember to say right now is like how he says in Jonathan's Hope, when he says, as ill as I am, is obviously a reference to like God saying I am the I am, but then also the reference to in Good Friday when he says, if I'm sinking in, what the line he says the same thing, you know, he says I am as well.
I never realized that, actually.
That was just something
the
I
am
caught.
Well, and then I think it's in Sod and the Seed, he says something about bowing like a Jew in prayer. But that was the other one I was thinking. But other than that, I can't think of a lot of religious context.
And I feel like that one on Sod and the Seed is like more directly referencing himself or referencing like a person rather than the actual like religious context.
Right. That was more like a joke.
Yeah. Was it in that same song where he says, "Oh, so steel as a goy's gut"?
It's Jonathan's Hope.
Okay. Yeah.
Still steel as a goy's gut. Oh, so concealed in the crease, but slow pitching like a Vatican priest to be pope. What? Dope. So every morning wake up with hope, and at night fall asleep at the end of your rope, alone pretending to cope. As ill as I am, but with all this will I'll yell, good God, what the hell, what the fuck? A white dove on the hood of a two-ton truck.
So yeah, he references, I think, his Jewish heritage a little bit more in this one, but more in a self-referencing way, and not I want to talk about God kind of.
Alopecia's more
not
spiritual.
Exactly.
Right.
We we were hoping that they would say the same thing at one point at the same time, and they did. But yeah, that was Mumps, etc. I think was it last week that we mentioned that this was originally going to be called Mumps, etc., etc.
I think I'm glad it wasn't.
Yeah, no, I think I like that he named Jonathan's Hope. Like, that fits so much, and that's why he did. Like, that's why he changed it. Just he was like, it felt right. I do want to get my hands on the demo track that's called Mumps, etc., but eventually I will. But yeah, so thank you so much, Diane, for joining us.
Yeah, thank y'all for having
It
me.
was super fun. Hopefully we can have you on again soon, or have your thoughts on some of the episodes. But like I said, I am beat. Yeah, so I didn't bring as much this week as I did with alopecia, but whenever we talk about Moh Lhean next week, I feel like that's the one that we all have the most hands-on personal experience with, because it was like we were the deepest into why
As it was
Yeah.
coming
As it was
out.
coming
It's
out.
the only one that
We anticipated.
Yeah.
besides, I mean, the only why one that
Right,
came
right.
out.
Right.
as
Yeah.
I
I mean,
was a
yeah,
fan,
Testarossa,
so.
we lost our minds whenever
Oh.
we heard that.
Yeah.
was announced,
We need to have a whole episode for
A whole
Oh, we
Testarossa.
episode
definitely
on
will,
that.
yeah. That was, I think, that's definitely one of my probably top two Y or Yoni side projects. Jaime's Basement just takes the cake for me almost every single time.
Yeah.
But it depends on during the summer. Like I'll start to feel really nostalgic for Testarossa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
listen to
Testarossa is so June.
Summer
and-
2016,
exactly,
like
yeah, yeah.
that particular
Yeah, I
feeling.
love it.
So once I get closer to those months, then I'll maybe Testarossa will
come
get,
back around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
What were you gonna say?
no, I was just gonna keep wrapping up.
No,
but
go for it.
no,
Oh. Okay. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Untethered Layers. Like I said, our next one will be about Moh Lhean, an absolute banger of an album from start to finish. It's the shortest one, which I remember whenever we saw the track list for it, we were like, it's only 33 minutes long. Like I was a little bit like,
It was kind of scary.
yeah.
Wait, isn't Eskimo Snow shorter than that?
Maybe, but
But it's
I
still
don't
still
think
short
so.
anyway.
yeah, and
Doesn't
Testarossa
matter.
was really short too. I just remember like not in the context of Y albums, but in the context of me like anticipating albums, that's short for an
Right,
album.
right.
And so I was like, damn, like I was really excited to hear more
Especially
music, but it
'cause-
fills every
Yeah,
single
yeah,
minute of
because
that,
of
yeah.
the transition.
Well, they had so
tracks.
many singles.
Oh,
for it.
right.
They released like about what 3
I
or
think
4
there were
singles?
4.
And then like you said, there were 2 transition tracks on there. But each of them, each of the singles, and even the ones that aren't singles, stand out so strongly. But we'll talk more about that next week. I don't want to
Right,
too
right.
lost on Moh Lhean.
Okay.
But thank you again to the Arc of You Network for having us. Noah and Gavin's episode for alopecia went up last week. At the same time, our Eskimo Snow one came out. So as this one is coming out, their Eskimo Snow episode will be coming out, if I am remembering that correctly. But thank you guys again, and we'll talk next week. Say bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.